The Russian Federation continues its march westward. It continues to increase its pressure almost all along the front lines. The Ukraine army, for its part, continues to fight valiantly, but continues to lose ground nearly everywhere. A couple of places they have gone on local counterattacks and have gained some territory, but then, like is the case in every situation, they then lose it. Meanwhile, on the western side, you have leaders continuing to make lots of big proclamations, but not followed by any action. In fact, nothing seems to happen at all other than the passage of time, which continually worsens the Ukraine's position and continually increases and strengthens the Russian side. To try to see if we can make some sense out of this and kind of catch the nuances here, we have Larry Johnson back with us, former CIA analyst and friend of the show. Larry, first of all, just welcome back.
Glad to be here, Danny.
Well, listen, I don't know. You've been to Russia a few times. You've met with some of the senior officials. Recently, Sergei Lavrov, which was a pretty amazing opportunity to actually sit and have a conversation with him. Not many in the West ever get that opportunity. So you have, I think, a better understanding from both the United States and the Russian side of kind of what's real and what's fiction. So we're really eager to have you on today. And in fact, this, as some of the news has come out just in the last couple of days, this out of the Ukrainian media, it's saying that, Russia's continuing to go forward and their operations reportedly intensify across the entire nearly 2,000-kilometer front line. Do you think that Russia is running out of steam despite some of these headlines?
Oh, no. In fact, there's much talk about a big offensive coming up. I maintain that the offensive has already started. Russia is operating all along the line of contact, and we're not talking, platoon size or company size elements. We're talking much larger than that, and coordinated, really combined arms operations. Some of them are designed to force the Ukrainians to relocate forces. And the problem the Ukrainians are now facing is they don't have enough strength to respond to all the points. So in the south, in Zaporizhzhia in particular, the Russians have made significant progress over the last week. They're moving into Sumy, which is up north at the very northern end of that, let's call it the arc. Think of it like a moon, half moon shape. So at the top of that arc is Sumy. Right next to the Sumy is Kursk. And then right in the middle sits Donetsk and Luhansk. Previously, the Russians' position was, and their demand to, okay, you want to negotiate an end to this, Ukraine, you've got to withdraw your forces from Zaporizhzhia and Kherson and the Donetsk and Luhansk. Pull out. And then once the military activities stop, then we can talk about how to bring an end to this. But until then, we're not going to stop. Now, I think we're looking at the very high likelihood Russia's going to take Sumy. They're going to push all the way to the Dnipro River. Every bit of territory that is east of the Dnieper will now be incorporated into Russia. They'll ultimately, I think, have a referendum in each of those oblasts and give them a chance. If they want to join Russia, then they'll be allowed to join Russia. And I suspect the majority of them.
This is Sumy right up in here. I'm showing on the screen here. Now, I think this is Chernihiv district, if I'm not mistaken, right? This area up here.
Right.
And then just for people's understanding, when you say the Dnipro River, that's the river that runs down approximately this zone right here. So this whole area right now, which is Ukrainian side, you argue could become red.
No, I'm saying it will become red. I don't say could, might. It will become red. That's where this is headed. Because Putin, we've seen Putin adjust the peace offerings over time. Back in March and April of 2022, when this whole thing kicked off, just 3 months after kicking off in February, Putin's offer was, hey, just allow the people of the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk, to have the Russian language, and to be able to have some measure of independence, and we'll pull all of our troops out. And there was, said, no, hell no, we're not going to take that. Okay. So that was in April. By September, Russia then holds referendum, not just in Donetsk and Luhansk, but in Zaporizhzhia and in Kherson. And the referendum question is, do you want to leave Ukraine and rejoin Russia? The vote was overwhelming, and people say, oh, the Russians were cooking the votes. No, they weren't, because the vast majority of people that live in those areas have grown up speaking Russian, as did Zelensky. He doesn't even speak good Ukrainian. So, they opted to join Russia. Okay, that now became the next offer. In June of 2024, those 4 provinces now, Ukraine get out. You don't get to have those anymore. And then just about a month ago, Putin signaled that, look, if they don't take this offer that's been on the table since June, then we're looking at basically Novorossiya. And Novorossiya, New Russia, refers to that area that is basically east of the Dnipro, as well as some of the territory along the West Bank, which includes Kiev or Kyiv, however you want to pronounce it. So I think where this is headed is Russia's going to win it on the ground militarily. They're under no rush. They're certainly under no pressure. The economy is not crumbling, and despite Cavoli's attempts a week ago, General Cavoli, the European commander, to pretend that, oh yeah, Russia's suffering catastrophic losses, but as he conceded, yeah, but they replaced them all and their army's grown to 1.5 million.
Right. And in fact, since you bring that up with Cavoli, in addition to what you said or what you cited there, he also tried to say, yeah, Russia's kind of doing better, but not really, when he said this.
Russia has been throwing a lot of troops and taking a lot of casualties, particularly in the last month or two. Has that stalled across, you go from Kharkiv down to Kherson, basically the front, or are there places where Russia's making progress?
So Russia has stopped making progress in Kursk right now. They haven't been able to dislodge the Ukrainians. If we come all the way down the front along Chasiv Yar and the towns in Luhansk, if we go down to Pokrovsk in Donetsk, the Russians' attacks seem to have petered out. They've decreased in the last couple of weeks significantly in number, but the size and scope of the attacks seems to have petered out as well. The Ukrainians are in good positions. They're in good defensive positions. They've improved some of their readiness and manpower situation. They are indeed producing large numbers of Russian casualties. In a couple of minor places, the Ukrainians have actually gained some ground back, but I do not see the Ukrainians being in imminent danger of collapse. I do see the Russians struggling to make the kind of gains they were making last autumn.
So if you just listen to that right there, you think, wow, I guess that we've reached some sort of frozen conflict. And now then the Ukraine side has picked up, the Russian side is weakening, and they're running out of gas. So, wow, this is probably a good time to make a negotiated settlement. What say you?
He's a liar. He comes from a good long tradition of General Westmoreland in Vietnam. We got the Vietnamese on the run. Lights at the end of the tunnel. The only thing they didn't realize was that light at the end of the tunnel was an onrushing train that was going to run their ass over. And, for Cavoli to sit there and say that, I mean, it's not a matter of interpretation. It just in terms of the amount of fires that are brought to bear on the battlefield. Even Cavoli in his testimony admitted Russia is producing more artillery shells than the United States and Europe combined can produce. Yeah, but we gave them the M777. Yeah, the M777 no longer is in production. And when you shoot those barrels have to be replaced, except we don't have any more in production. I mean, the idiocy of this is staggering, but it explains It explains why we didn't win the war in Iraq. It explains why we didn't win the war in Afghanistan, why a bunch of goat herders with sidearms and rifles beat our rear end after 20 years. So
Yeah, I was about to make that comment that what he said there sounded uncomfortably similar to David Petraeus, who in congressional testimony, wearing his uniform with all the medals on there, just like Cavoli, when he told everybody that things were getting better in Afghanistan, the Afghan army was getting better. We were starting to reverse the momentum, all those kinds of things, which was all a lie at the time. And now he's saying the same thing, despite what we see on the battlefield.
Now that would be a great video to superimpose, to play in contrast, and then go back and pick up, I don't know if there's any good video footage of Westmoreland out of Vietnam.
Oh,
I guess all these guys take that class at West Point, how to lie your ass off to Congress. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, Gary's an amazing guy. I bet he'll, before the show's over, he'll probably come up with all three of those, man. It's not just Cavoli, because and I almost hesitate to use it, but I'm going to do it anyway, because Ben Hodges is being Ben Hodges again, and he has talk about interpretation. He sees things somewhat different than you do.
After 11 years of war, Russia still only controls about 20% of Ukraine. Even though they had all the advantages in numbers, and even though the United States, especially recently, has failed to provide the intelligence and capabilities for Ukraine that we should, Russia still cannot defeat Ukraine. They cannot knock Ukraine out of the war. And I think reports that somehow Russia is gaining, that's just not accurate. I mean, it's been 8 months since Ukraine went into Kursk, and only now is Russia finally getting closer to pushing Ukraine out of Kursk, but there still are Ukrainian troops inside Kursk, and Ukraine has now moved into Belgorod. So I think what we're seeing is a determined resistance by Ukrainian forces. Their defense industry is growing while at war. Russia, meanwhile, has enormous economic problems, and I don't know how much longer they can keep doing what they're doing.
Okay, a number of things I want to talk about there, but the first one is he says, they've now gone into Belgorod. Okay, you see this little white dot here? that's where they were in Belgorod. They've now been pushed out. So that was just a pointless effort. And then he's talking about there's been no operation up in Kursk, but you see, there's just a couple of very small fields, little forest belts here and here that are left. I think all the villages that they'd once held are now gone. So that's only a matter of time before that's completely pushed out. And then all of the casualties. And I think you were saying somewhere around 75,000 Ukrainian men died in this area for absolutely nothing. And who knows how many died here. So when he's saying Russia isn't advancing, but I mean, just look at all this area here. I think that's kind of evidence that Russia is advancing somewhere.
Yeah, live map, Ukraine live map, I think that's what it's called. All you gotta do is do a time lapse there, and the Russians have been steadily moving forward. Now, one of the reasons they're not launching what people like Hodges think should be attempted, a big aerial offensive with mass forces, and because the Russians are minimizing casualties. I heard that directly from one of the retired generals that I spoke with while in Russia. I mean, and he was, he looked like he'd been cast out of Hollywood as a general, just a big, imposing, square cut jawed, and, and he spoke good English too, which helped. But Russia's trying to minimize their casualties, and they're not conducting a war. What I find just outrageous coming out of Hodges' mouths. So Russia is fighting NATO, who's using Ukraine as a proxy. Russia is fighting an army that's equipped with artillery, that's got drones, that's got tanks, that's got armored vehicles, that's got full intelligence support from all of NATO, and has been progressing steadily to the west. The United States, by contrast, spent 20 years in Afghanistan fighting guys that didn't have artillery, that didn't have tanks, that didn't have air force. They didn't have fixed wing or rotary wing capability. They didn't have overhead satellite. And they kicked our ass. We like to pretend, oh, we beat them. Yeah, you beat a bunch of farmers with sidearms. And we want to sit here and critique Russia over their lack of progress. I mean, it is, we are so full of ourselves, Danny, in this side of the ocean. We are so damn blind. We don't even see ourselves as we are. We imagine ourselves to be this big, mighty power. By God, we're going to go into Iran. We're going to bomb and wipe out their nuclear program. Why is it that it's been 16 months with the Houthis and you can't stop the Houthis?
Yeah. I actually want to talk about that here in a few minutes. But there was a couple of other things that are as a subset of what both he and Cavoli said. They both implied that the Ukrainian army is actually getting better, and that the Russians running out of space. But I want to show you something. So you remember that the original commander-in-chief for the Ukrainian armed forces was Zaporizhzhia. And then he got replaced after allegedly not being successful enough. They brought in Sursky. Well, you may recall this from last July, where Sursky says, I know we will win and how. And he's talking about turning the tables against Russia. That was last July. And then the news here a couple of days ago from the same Guardian is, actually now the Ukraine's military chief must go. A high-profile former Ukrainian commander has called the head of the country's military to step aside, accusing him of a lack of strategic imagination and putting Ukrainian soldiers' lives at risk with borderline criminal orders. Bogdan Krotovich, who quit as the chief of the Azov Brigade, that's an interesting fact by itself, in February, partly so he could speak out, said he believed that Armed Forces Commander General Alexander Sursky must go and Ukraine's military leadership must be shaken up. Now, it's interesting that he says he must go because he hasn't had any success anywhere. He's the one that led the Kursk offensive that cost 70,000 lives, that went into Belgorod, that tried to stop the Russians all along the Eastern Front, haven't had success. But instead of replacing the commander, how's about just stopping the war?
Yeah. I mean, this is reminiscent in a way towards the end of World War II. Basically, after the Battle of Kursk, which took place in the summer of 43, the German army was defeated. There was no way it could recover the power it needed to push the Soviets back. And from then on, it was just constant movement to the west, ultimately with Berlin being captured. It should have ended really into 43, start of 44, but it went on because there's a bureaucratic inertia here, and that keeps going until it's snuffed out. So that's what I say. The hopes to end this thing through negotiations, not going to happen. It's going to end on the battlefield, and it'll end with Ukraine's defeat, Russia's victory. And see, up to this point, Russia has not been fighting it as a war. They've not mobilized on a war footing. They're handling it as it is described as a special military operation.
And I want to comment on that point because we had Andrei Martyanov on our show earlier this week, and he made that same point. Mm-hmm. He said, and he explained the difference to a Western audience in ways that I hadn't really seen put so clear. He said that we think it's just wordsmithing. Oh, you're just calling it a special military operation instead of a war. It's obvious that. And he said, no, there is a profound, significant difference. He echoed, or actually, I guess, said the same thing you did about how Russia is operating an SMO, they call it, by minimizing casualties and minimizing target civilian casualties on the other side by only going after military targets. But he said if they turn this into a war, if this goes into a full mobilization, he said two big changes would happen. Number one, we would no longer care about what got hit on the other side. We would just go after what we needed to with much bigger casualty counts on the Ukraine side. And he said we would also lower our threshold for civilian friendly casualties. So we would take more risk that way in order to swing this through. I'm pretty sure that you agree with those definitions. But my question to you is, though, do you think there's any risk that Russia might adopt those inside Ukraine as opposed to if they ever went in and fought NATO?
I think if they continue on their current trajectory, no. I don't see them right now mobile. They don't need to mobilize. They're winning on the ground, and they are what they have become is more aggressive on the perimeter and countering NATO ISR. They've had a couple of incidents last week where they went after a plane that was doing some collection, and they hit it with some electronic warfare, turned off its guidance system. So they had to, the pilots of that aircraft had to navigate by geographic features to get back to their base. But at this point, Russia have a lot of cards they have not played, such as turning off all the satellites. Their S-550 system is a satellite killer, so they could turn the lights off immediately for Western intelligence, and they'd be blind, number one, and their ability to target weapon systems would be curtailed as well, because they're dependent upon a lot of that data flow from satellites. They've not mobilized. Their army's already up to 1.5 million, and they're still recruiting an average of 30,000 per month. And all of those troops are going through training. They get a full year of training before they're shoved into any kind of combat role. But they also have enough manpower that they're rotating forces in and out, so that the new forces come in, they get hooked up with some experienced forces, they get experience, they get combat time. The guys that have been there for a while get pulled out, they get to go back and rest and recuperate. It's actually Russia's. This is, as you know, that's the best school you can go to when you get to do it for real. You don't have to do training exercises. You're doing it real world, and the learning that takes place there is you can't match it.
I'm going to shift gears here just a little bit in a second to take a look at some of the current U.S. actions here and where we're trying to go with this, which is kind of part of why I call the title here the Western Leaders Paralysis. But before I do, one of our guests is asking a question here, which I think is relevant to where we're about to go anyway. And he said, what do you think about the so-called Chinese troops fighting for the Russians? I wanted to get your thought on that. I figured that's how it would start.
Oh, my God. They figured it's the same guys that they were calling North Koreans before. These Asians, they all look alike. It's sort of racist in that regard. It was just a quick side story. When I was in Honduras, we had a nurse from Kansas that said, how do you tell these Hondurans apart? They all look alike. And I said, well, once you get to know them, they don't. They're very distinct. So one day I walked in on a group of Hondurans that I was working with on an agricultural development project, and they were all laughing. And then they saw me, they got real quiet. So I knew they were talking about me. And I said, what's going on? And they go, promise you won't get mad? I said, no. They go, you North Americans, you all look alike. So
I've heard that.
This Chinese thing's a fabrication. I don't know where they got these two guys from, but the Chinese are not sending their troops there to fight. That's not a Chinese thing. The Chinese are not. They're not a bunch of warriors. Is the reality. The last war that they attempted with Vietnam, they got the rear end kicked in 1979. So the Chinese is focused more on industry, manufacturing, building ships. But they're not about to go get involved in the war that way, because Russia doesn't need them.
Right. That's what I was going to say. China doesn't want to get involved. They want to kind of stay balanced. Russia has said that. They've said the same thing, that China is actually balanced. He said there may be some individual persons come over and volunteer or something, but that's nothing on the Chinese official side, because that's not what China wants. Right. But according to State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce, the Chinese are involved to a degree.
China is a major enabler of Russia in the war in Ukraine. China provides nearly 80% of the dual-use items Russia needs to sustain the war. 80% comes from China. As President Trump has said, continued cooperation between these two nuclear powers will only further contribute to global instability and make the United States and other countries less safe, less secure, and less prosperous. I think that's an understatement.
Is that an understatement or is that an overstatement?
Let's deal with the facts. Which of the three countries are responsible for killing over 2 million people over the last 60 years? It's not Russia. It's not China. I mean, if you stack up the bodies in Vietnam and the bodies in Afghanistan, the bodies of civilians in Syria, in Iraq, hell, in Gaza, which we're enabling, in Libya, Somalia. The only country that's really been a danger to the world, unfortunately, is us, the United States. We can't keep our damn hands to ourselves. And yet we always project onto Russia and China the kind of imperial meddling that it's what we do. The number of countries that were involved with overthrowing and interfering in their elections. Let's stay home and clean up our own cities. Let's educate our own children. Let's have some decent health care that's available to every American before we think we're going to go out and fix the world instead of breaking it. No, I used to, have some measure of respect for Tammy when she was, saw her on Fox. What a hack. She's as bad as anything that Joe Biden had up front there.
Yeah.
She doesn't look like Count Chocula, but,
Yeah, I was actually talking with Gary before we went on the show here today, and we were kind of making that same comment. We'd said actually the similar thing that you did. I'm like, some of the spokesmen for the Biden administration, we just kind of rolled our eyes. It's like, what are you even talking about? And and now here in the Trump administration, the same kind of thing. Now, I think that there is, because I've heard from multiple sources that China is providing dual use capabilities for Russia that they need, et cetera. It's most civilian stuff that Russia repurposes for somewhere else. I have no doubts that that's true. China is not getting involved militarily because they don't want to. They don't think they need to. Russia doesn't want them, et cetera. But it's funny though to say that comment out there and this over the top. It's but a threat to American national security, to global security, et cetera. And then just kind of say, anyway, moving on to the next question. It's like, wait, if you believe that, then why are you doing nothing about it? And if you're doing nothing about it, do you actually believe that that's a big threat to it? Whereas I see it as that's just commerce.
Well, let's look at it from the Russian standpoint. You, the United States, are supplying M777, artillery, HIMARS, ATACMS, and Patriot missiles. And on top of that, F-16s and targeting data, and you're attacking us and you're killing our people. That's not just dual use. Yeah. You are committing an act of war. Frankly, that's what I think the Russians should be saying. Should put us on notice and say, basically, cut it out or there will be a war. You can't, the United States wants to have it both ways because Russia and China have a trade relationship, but China is not providing Russia with targeting data, and Russia is not providing, China is not providing Russia with any significant weapon capability because Russia makes its own.
Yeah.
That moment I love from Cavoli, he was talking, the Russians have lost all these tanks and they've lost all these vehicles, but they've replaced them all. And the Russians build 1,500 tanks a year, and we build 50 Abrams. And you go, what? And actually, we don't build them. What we do is we take the old frames and trick them up. It's like taking, your 67 Mustang. Hey, we're going to put new paint on it, new wheels, hey, some flashy lights. For God's sake, man, acknowledge that Russia's light years ahead of us on the industrial production of military equipment.
Yeah, that's a fact. I want to go back to Tammy Bruce here for a second, because really to your point that you just made there about kind of what she's not saying, that was one level. At least she had some information in that one.
Yeah.
What you're going to hear in this one here, this is a little bit longer of a clip, but I intentionally made it because it gets a little uncomfortable about how long it goes because of what she's not saying. The preparation for this, her statement here, she was asked by a reporter that, hey, Rubio said a week or so ago that we would know within a matter of weeks, not months, if Russia was serious about wanting to have a negotiated settlement. And he said, is that still the case? Here's how she answered.
He had a press conference at the end of NATO where he did go into very specifics when he was asked about the timeline, is that we would know within a matter of weeks if Russia was serious about peace. He said not months, not a year, but a matter of weeks, he said, we would know. And I think that this goes to the argument that they've made, even in the beginning of the talks, some of the summits with Russia, and the first summit was, as the Secretary had noted, was to determine if they were serious. These are active men with a term in which to get this done. And plus the lives affected, we don't have time. Every day, every week that goes by affects the quality of people's lives, and some people who are alive now will not be alive tomorrow. So it is held with urgency. It will be a matter of weeks. And you, of course, you mentioned the attack on Kryvyi Rih, which is I guess the hometown of President Zelensky. It was a Russian Federation ballistic missile strike in a residential neighborhood of that town. It is further underscores President Trump's urgent call for peace. And he's affected by this. It's long time to stop the death and the destruction and end this war.
I'm going to get to the Kryvyi Rih part in a second because I know you have something to say on that. But that whole first section, she was asked, is the steel situation that you're going to know within weeks if Russia's serious or not? Implication, if not, what are you going to do, et cetera. And all she did was spend about a minute reiterating the question and then never even answered it, but very demonstrative. And so, and it just is like a waste of time. Why are you even entertaining the questions if you're not going to answer anything? And I wish the reporter had said, the questioner had said, anyway, like that, I ask, is it still? What do you make of her answer on that part?
No, they're not listening to the Russians. It's real simple. The Russians translate from their language into English, and they say it in English, which is, we're not going to agree to any ceasefire. The way you want, if you want to bring an end to this conflict, deal with the fundamental causes. Number one, that NATO has been relentlessly expanding to our borders, and that's got to stop. You got to pull NATO out of your bases in places like Poland and Romania. That's ultimately has to happen. Stop it. Stop attacking us. Stop conducting your military exercises on our border. That's number one. Stop using Ukraine as a proxy. Stop arming it, equipping it, and then giving it basically battle plans so they can attack us. That has to stop. That's number two. And, we're not going to agree to a ceasefire until those things are settled. Russia's been clear on that. There's no mystery. Hey, they agreed, okay, yeah, we'll put a 30-day pause on attacking electrical infrastructure, which Russia claims that they've abided by, and Ukraine certainly has not. They've been launching attacks. Then Russia said, okay, we'll agree to allow the flow of grain and fertilizer out of the Black Sea. But that was contingent upon the United States, getting the banking sanctions withdrawn so that the one bank that handles the agricultural commerce can process payments. And the Europeans went, hell no, we're not doing that. So everything that Russia has agreed to, the United States has been unable to deliver on, and yet they're saying, oh, Russia's dragging its feet. Russia does not care. That's what people need to understand. Russia's not sitting there, wringing its hands and, oh my God, I hope Donald Trump's not mad at us. Oh, I hope we're still on his good buddy list. No, Putin's they've been very direct. And you've heard both from Lavrov and Rybakov, the deputy foreign minister, over the course of the last week, where they said, hey, we have yet to see any workable, reasonable proposal out of the West. We're waiting. but we don't have anything. Meanwhile, though, talks continue about normalizing diplomatic relations. That's the good news.
Yeah, lots to talk. I actually want to bring Gary in on this because I know he's got a lot of things to say. He actually worked for a period of time with Tammy Bruce, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So, Gary, when you see stuff like this, when you see these kind of comments that don't seem to be even including a lot of the facts that Larry just talked about, I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I make of it, guys, it's not often that you get to see somebody learn how to tap dance in real time.
Yeah.
It was really quite something, actually, how she avoided the very thing that was right in front of all of us like that. But she did what she thought she had to do, and it's embarrassing because I think Donald Trump deserves more than that, and she could have been more forthright, but she wasn't. So I think that also says something that as she approaches her job.
Yeah, and it's unnecessary because I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling the truth. I mean, but, Trump says he wants to end the war. I mean, Larry, I mean, if he wanted to end the war, we could do that pretty quickly, don't you think?
Turn off the spigot, stop the flow of intelligence, and withdraw your American personnel.
That's it's almost verbatim what Doug McGregor has said on our show several times, and the war will be over. Really
hey, Larry.
quick.
Yeah,
Larry, you said that Russia could shut down the power grid basically for Ukraine. Are you saying would that include what what Elon Musk is providing with Starlink? They could shut that down, also interfere with it.
Well, I shut down the satellite system. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but take down Starlink and its ability to be used.
Oh, really?
As a tool for communication and coordination of military operations.
Right.
So one of the questions I have is that in you and both Andrei Martyanov both said the same, that Russia is prioritizing taking care of their or minimizing, not eliminating, but minimizing their friendly casualties or so. But isn't there an issue to where if you go slower, you allow the Ukraine side to continue reinforcing and to continue, even if it's forced mobilization, get people on, you allow the West to keep the spigot open going on. So by delaying and slowing down this methodical move, you can argue that it actually costs Russia more to gain, as opposed to saying, all right, we're going to go with a genuine big arrow and try to punch through a big hole here. Why do you think that Russia calculates that's not in their interest?
So let me draw a parallel. Have you ever been to Miami, Florida?
I have.
Okay, and then driven north up 95 towards West Palm?
I did actually once.
And it's, what do you see there? You go from Miami, North Miami, Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale,
Boca Raton,
Pompano Beach,
Delray Beach,
Boca Raton. And it's community after community after community after community, even though they're separate places. That's Donetsk. That's Luhansk. So, and I didn't really appreciate this at the outset of the war. I thought they would, like you, I thought, man, they're going to move. They'll go through this like a hot knife through butter. Well, what happened from 2015 through 2021, the Ukrainians were able to go into each of those various cities, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, Solidansk, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and they would build up these incredible fortifications, underground fortifications, reinforced concrete. And so what the Russians faced was they could take them quickly and suffer massive casualties, but they didn't need to do that. So that's why it's been so slow moving through the Donbass and the Luhansk. You go back to May of 2022, they took Mariupol, a major city, in 6 weeks, because Mariupol did not have the same kind of fortifications that are embedded there in the Donbass. The Donbass historically has been this industrial center. So it has all these deep coal mines, salt mines, a variety of different mines for a whole other minerals and products. And so that's what we failed to understand on the West, to appreciate what they're up against. And that's been one of the major considerations in the tactics they've employed. that it's easier to, basically to shut them down. Now, the one thing I don't understand is why they have not blown every bridge across the Dnieper and cut them off logistically. But, I'm not on the Russian general staff, and I think those guys probably have a pretty good reason for why they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how that's going to work out.
You know-
One other thing I'd like to ask your opinion about is in terms of the movement in their area of Pokrovsk, which is kind of in the center of the Eastern Front. And from, I guess, maybe about August up through maybe November, early December, Russia had some significant, I mean, they were making 1 and 2 and sometimes 3 kilometers per day in that whole area. And they were driving through, making these big, and everybody was afraid that, okay, Pokrovsk could fall very soon, et cetera. But then somewhere around December, it kind of started going into a crawl. And it's really, for the last almost 2 months, has been a static situation. Ukraine tried a couple of counterattacks to try to pinch off part of the western portion of the Russian advance. That's been moved back out, but it hasn't gone any much forward from that. What do you attribute that to? Because Kavoli cited that as they have stopped around Pokrovsk, implying that it's the Ukraine that had prevented Russia from going forward.
Yeah, he's not paying attention to the maps. What's happened is they're moving out on the flanks. They're encircling farther out because they say, why waste all of our effort trying to fight over one particular geographic point when we basically can go out and cut off their lines of communication so that their ability to resupply will be curtailed. That's what they're doing. I read, I don't know if you follow Marat Karulin. He's
No, not familiar with that.
Okay, I'll send you some of his articles.
Well, thanks.
He's a frontline war correspondent. He's a buddy of Andrei Martyanov's, of all things.
Okay.
That's where I first met Marat, and he's got a much better handle on the movements tactically, what's taking place. So again, I'm always the Western military critics and pundits, the Petraeus, the Hodges, these cats. It is always entertaining to hear their views on how Russia ought to be conducting a war that neither of them have ever fought in, a war that neither of them have ever commanded in. None. They have zero experience actually fighting a combined arms against a peer. Because the truth be told, is you and your whistleblower days pointed out, they lied their asses off about what was going on in Afghanistan. And even then, Afghanistan didn't have the luxury of being backed by China and Russia, who were supplying weapons. And no, China and Russia stayed out of it. It was like, let the Americans knock themselves out.
Yeah, that is something that is not lost on me, that we couldn't even get the guys who were in bed sheets and flip flops, as we used to say, with rifles, had no major power proxy behind it. Whereas, and we did, because we had NATO was all involved with that. But anyway, I digress. I don't want to get into that right now. I'm still a sore point for me.
Danny, I think what it also appears to me is that Russia is conducting the peace talks and the negotiations slow, methodically, just what they're doing on the battlefield. They're in no rush. They have been, just as Larry said, they've been explicit as to what they want, what they're aiming for, what their bullseye is. They're not going to be deterred from it, and they're happy to go so methodically to reaching that point. Just what they're doing on the battlefield. That's what they're doing in the boardrooms, in the negotiation rooms.
That's a good point. I hadn't actually thought of it in those terms. Actually, their diplomatic and military philosophies do seem to be aligned in there, and they seem immovable on that. Larry, I wanted to ask you one more tactical question before we move on here. At the end of that Tammy Bruce comment there, she brought up the issue of Kryvyi Rih, and the claim has been from Zelensky especially that it was just a civilian town. That's my hometown, and y'all just want to stick a finger in my eye, so you blew up some civilian places, a hotel and some other stuff. All civilian casualties. It's just a horrible. It's just another war crime by the Russian side. What do you say?
Well, the Russians claim it was a meeting of NATO and Ukrainian military officers, and that they hit them when they were gathered for a meeting and killed them. So that's the Russian version. We got the Ukrainian version. I think we now know, based upon other evidence that's come out, and there recently was presentation at the United Nations by Russia, but it was documented. And that the allegations about Russia committing war crimes in Bucha, that it killed all these civilians. They had a French aid worker who was one of the ones testifying before that UN session. He was actually in Bucha that day, and he saw the Ukrainians driving in with trucks full of dead bodies, taking the bodies out and placing them on the road. This was 4 days after the Russians had already left the area. So the Russians have been able to document that claims of war crimes and atrocities attributed to them are in fact by Ukraine. And I simply note the Ukrainians are Nazis. They are Nazis. They wear the symbols, they got the signs, they got the doctrine. I don't trust a Nazi myself, but
Yeah, and you know, I've never been to Ukraine, so I can't say anything about firsthand. But I can tell you that a couple of years ago, I met with a Spanish from Spain reporter who said he was also on the ground at the time, and he says that version that you just described about how it wasn't real. He said it's exactly what he saw, but he was not allowed to report on it.
Yeah.
So that's more evidence, because this guy certainly wasn't by any stretch a pro-Russian person. So I'll just take that at face value.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, though, I want to shift gears onto a separate topic that I know you have some expertise in, and that is on the potential for potential for the United States to join with Israel in a war against Iran. I want to show you a couple of clips here because they show, I think, some the mindset of the Trump administration. This first one is on 7 March, where Trump was pretty emphatic about what he intended with Iran.
We're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
So that was on 7 March, and he said that we're, in the last times here, we're the last hours, we're running out of time, we have to have a deal. And then exactly 1 month later, on the 7th of April, 3 days ago, was sitting next to Benjamin Netanyahu, he added this.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
Okay, so first of all, just a lot of people claim Trump doesn't actually want to go to war with Iran. He just wants them to negotiate a better deal. What do you say to that?
But if you don't have a basketball, and I come to you and say, Danny, you got to negotiate that you don't have a basketball. You go, well, I don't have one. So, okay, you got a deal. That's what's going on here. Iran does not have a nuclear device. Iran is not building a nuclear device. They said that in 2003 through their Ayatollah Khamenei. The U.S. intelligence community has held that judgment now for the last 22 years. But more importantly, on January 17th, Iran and Russia signed an agreement. Article 46 of that agreement, I believe, dealt with the issue of nuclear proliferation. And they agreed that they were going to work on non-proliferation. Why is that important? Because Russia's not going to sign an agreement like that with Iran if Iran's building a nuke. It's that simple. And so you've got Iran now with the guarantees not only of Russia, but of China, that it doesn't have a nuke. So if that's all Trump is looking for, they'll be able to go in and say, okay, basically, we need to start JCPOA. That agreement that Trump walked away from actually put all of Iran's nuclear facilities under international inspection, imposed limits on how much could be processed, and had an actual system that they wouldn't be building a weapon. Well, they're not building a weapon now anyway, because they've got something better. They have a defense alliance with Russia and with China, and they don't need them. So, if the United States is stupid enough to launch an attack on Iran, I'd just like somebody, you armchair generals out there, you military geniuses, explain to me why we're going to be so much more effective against Iran, who's 10 times the size of Yemen, who has advanced air defense systems, who has combat air, who have missiles of all sorts. Well, we're going to be more effective against them than we are with the Houthis, because we've only been battling the Houthis now for 16 months. And they've only shot down 18 of our Predator drones, 3 in the last week.
Oh, is it that many? I didn't know it was that many.
Yeah, 3 in the last week, when you think about it. And that's at 30 million a pop. So now they're up to like $440 million. Yeah, we're showing those Houthis, by God, we can kill civilians with bombs and no problem, but we can't stop the missiles. And Danny, you know why they're using the Predators, because the Predators can fly out and in real time spot a mobile launcher and hit it. That's why they're flying them, because our other ISR methods have a delay built in. Like, the satellite's got it pinpointed at X, Y, and Z, and you relay it through, and you finally get the launch, and you just send out, and by the time it gets there, it's gone. But with the Predators, you got some hope that you can actually hit a mobile launcher. Except it looks like the Houthis have developed a tactic of putting their missiles out there as bait. So the Predators fly over and then they shoot one of them down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They're not stupid. We are, but they're not.
So, do you have, I think I emailed you earlier in the week, and I don't know if you've had any time to see anything different. There was a Truth Social video posted by Trump, I think it was on Sunday, that they claimed that they had killed a bunch of Houthis getting ready for military operation of some sort. He said, oops, now that they're gone and no one's going to attack our ships, etc. But looking at that video and the people that were on the ground there looks really similar and strikingly so to other religious events out in the open. What do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, just that. I mean, I talked to Pepe Escobar, who had just been in Yemen. He left before that happened. But that's a traditional tribal meeting, how they gather to meet as a community and make decisions. They weren't gathered around a launcher. There were no visible offensive weapons in sight, apart from people carrying, an AK-47 or something. But, if you go out in West Virginia with a bunch of rednecks, you're going to find them carrying shotguns and ARs.
Yeah, I've got a concealed carry permit myself. So yeah, that's the one right there. Yeah. So you see, that just does not look like a military action to me. And, I said this actually on the day that it came out. I was like, what we typically do in those kind of situations is you have to, have it cleared, and you have to have some kind of reason to think that that's a military target. But these guys know that. I mean, you just talked about how they're deceiving us into maybe flying over and end up shooting down some of our missiles. If they're going to do military training, they know our satellites are out there, know our ISR. They're not going to meet in a large group of 80 some odd people like that. If they think that they could be killed for military purposes.
It was, we committed a war crime. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody's come out with anything on that yet. I've been a little surprised that there hadn't been any comment. At least it's gotten into any of the press that I have access to from Yemen or so. I don't know if that's coming later, but it just doesn't look right. I'll just say it like that. But so what do you think about if Trump does make good on this, and you say that, if Trump just wants to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon, well, they don't have a basketball, as you put it. Yeah. But that guy sitting next to him in there, he said, he actually looked over at him once. He said, and I don't think he wants to go the hard way either. And I'm like, yeah, but does he? Because I'm not sure that is the right. I think that he does want to go. And I think Netanyahu actually wants Trump to do this dirty work for him. What do you think?
They may be foolish enough to do that. I do not discount that at all. I have spoken with a good friend that's had several meetings with Trump, and he I asked him directly. I said, how are Trump's critical thinking skills? Not good. That was it. I'll leave it in the charitable. Just not. Trump's not a good critical thinker. He's street smart in some areas, and but he's emotional, and he often lets his emotions overcome his good judgment. I mean, we're seeing that with the tariff stuff right now. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think they're ultimately going to do it personally, but we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I hope to God I'm wrong.
Man, do I ever hope you're wrong as well. But that's where my gut tells me, and I'm just holding my breath and praying that some of these saner moments do, and some of these better advisors do get that in there to keep it from something that would happen bad. But we'll have to wait and see how it works out. But in any case, really appreciate you coming back on today, and love your shirt. Everybody, there was some guessing, by the way. I want to ask. Somebody suggested in the chat earlier, and actually before we went on the air, that they said your middle initial C. They speculated that was apparently a French word that means shirt.
No, it's Calvin. I'm one of the few white Calvins you ever meet.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I don't think Calvin means shirt in France, so I think they may be off on that. But one of those.
I've been called some other C words, but those aren't for polite conversation.
Right. We'll leave that one off. All right. Well, listen, thanks for coming on today. Look forward to seeing you back real soon. Yeah. And we appreciate you guys coming on too. And just to let you know, we got at 3:00 this afternoon, about an hour from now, Alexander Mercurius of the Durand is going to be our guest out. And he's going to be saying how Russian realism and European dreams equals a Ukraine defeat. We'll be talking more about that. Never want to miss Alexander Mercurius. Always has some great stuff to say. We'll see you in 1 hour on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.